actually some tight timeframes that we're looking at to make sure that we provide producers that opportunity to look at those base acres.
Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. That was David Schemm, State Executive Director with the USDA Farm Service Agency in Kansas. My name is Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. He's joining us today from Washington, D.C., and we'll talk a little bit about what he's doing there. But David, thanks for being on the podcast again.
Hey, Aaron, thank you. Anytime. It's always great to get in there and talk to the listeners there in Kansas and our wheat growers and farmers across Kansas. Obviously, called the wheat state for a reason and near and dear to my heart.
Well, I think the last time you and I recorded one of these, the big, beautiful bill was kind of in the hopper. It was signed on July 4th and kind of being touted as a big investment in farm programs. From your perspective with Kansas FSA, what did that legislation mean for Kansas farmers?
From USDA standpoint, we're continuing to implement aspects and portions of it. Some of it has been implementing at FSA. We're implementing it here. Aaron, I think maybe for everybody's benefit, just to kind of give a little bit of a historical perspective, one of the big things that will be impacting producers a lot is the statutory reference price, especially when we talk about ARC PLC. And, that's something I think that our producers will see just a huge impact when we start to look at payments as they come out here this October. But again, kind of referencing that historical perspective, Aaron, kind of through my history of being involved around ag and everything like that, and specifically a little bit Kansas wheat and even through NOG, I did have an opportunity. I got to testify in front of the House on the 2013 Farm Bill, and I actually had the opportunity to testify in front of both the Senate and the House Ag Committee on the 2018 Farm Bill. And Aaron, I still remember one of my key talking points back then was raising that reference price specifically for wheat, just making it more reflective. So it's kind of interesting from my perspective that, that would have been way back there, about 2016, 2017 that we were talking about that. And we're talking 10 years later, and the neat opportunity for me, because I kind of get to see both sides of it in that aspect, kind of some of the formulation of some of that initial idea. And then obviously, as we roll into getting to implement it. I still remember, Aaron, just again for popular note, one of my talking points when I talked in front of the House and the Senate there. And darn it, I didn't quite get it, Aaron. I was asking for a $6.50 reference price on wheat. We got close. We got $6.35.
Well, that's got to be rewarding. Your memory going all the way back. And thank goodness with where we are with input costs and everything like that reference price, that $6.35 has a nice ring to it. Congratulations on your long haul and ending up in the position where you are. That's got to be pretty rewarding. Well, for the 2025 crop year, speaking of ARC and PLC, FSA automatically paying producers the higher of those two, but that changes a little bit here for this current crop year in 2026. Producers are going to have to make that election. Tell us about the sign-up process for that.
That is one thing that, again, with what was passed into the OBA was that nuance that just actually probably for once Congress got it right. They realized that there was not going to be that opportunity for producers to choose for that 2025 year. So they gave that automatic hire of there. Yeah, you're right. 2026 will be, again, the producer will have that. It's a 1-year opt payment there, and that they would have to choose for just the 2026 year. If you go back, you remember at one point we had to make 3-year elections or 5-year elections, but now it's just a 1-year election on that there. That's something that we're going to be looking at. We're working on some other components of the One Big Beautiful Bill there to get that in place first there. But that's as we come into the October there timeframe there. And we will having to be making that decision for producers that September, October sign up for the 2026 ARC PLC. Again, for producers, just making sure they're aware and understand, Aaron, it's the aspect of that. One of the key components of that, establishing, quote unquote, that market a year average for those crops, whether it's wheat, corn, milo, soybeans, whatever it is out there, is that the marketing year, what has been established as a marketing year for that crop, has to come to a close before, quote unquote, that price can be established, then be correlated to the reference price, which then allows those payments to be calculated there. So producers sign up. And again, 2025, producers theoretically would have signed up last year getting the payment coming up this October. Again, for producers, when they're coming up to sign up for 2026, again, you're signing up there, but that payment's not showing up until that October. And again, it comes into the closing of the marketing year. And that's what the key component is. Many times producers will ask, well, why don't I see that payment quicker? And it's just because in order to do the calculations, that marketing year needs to be closed.
It's important to watch that window when that reference price is getting set to stay up to date on that. Also in the big beautiful bill was increasing base acres, and some of that obviously is apportioned to Kansas. So what's the process behind that? Who's eligible?
From an FSA, from Kansas FSA perspective, that is a big thing that we have been working on in history, because to be able to help establish or know how many base acres or acres would be theoretically available, one thing that we've been working on is going back and looking from 2019 through 2023. And so our offices out there across the state have been, digging into the history of those planted acres during that time frame. Again, acres planted, what crops were planted, going through all that. And it's been a big project for us, but obviously it's very key. It's one of the things that, as I have talked and worked with offices and explaining, that we have all really put a lot of our energy, time into, Aaron, so that we can make sure that we can get that data there. We've gotten that data. That data goes up to the national office here, and basically they're calculating, because here's reality of it, that 30 million acres was what was passed in that one big beautiful bill. And the reality is that simply it is not going to be enough acres available for the total planted acres that occurred during those timeframes to add all of those acres into it. That's just the reality of it there. Congress did not give that. That was authorized through Congress there. Quite openly, I know Richard Fordyce, the secretary, have talked a lot about this, is that it's going to be just prorated out there. And so, the acres that have the states that have the ability to add acres, in order, if the sum total is whatever you want to say, a number, whether it's 60 million acres or whether it's 40 million acres, and if it was 60 million acres, there's only 30 million acres available, that means that every state will only get about 50% of those acres. Again, I don't think it's quite that ratio. Be honest, Aaron, I don't even know what the ratio is, but there's going to be no changing around that. It'll just be allocated out there to those states there. I even look at operation. My son Clay is out there running in western Kansas. I think most people familiar with Kansas realize that when we look at what those historical base acres are out there, and then the changing crop practices, especially in Kansas, and Aaron, I think you could even say the western, 2/3, for sure, half of the state there, that they're cropping that ground a lot more, because those base acres were established out there kind of a lot of ways on that old wheat-fallow program. 50% of the field was in wheat, and, the other 50% was fallowed. So they've been cropping that ground a lot more intensively. I've heard projections anywhere from 2 to 3 million acres may be available in the perspective to Kansas out there to be able to update those base acres there. Again, we don't know, but we are definitely, national office is definitely in the process. We've done that history dig from a state perspective, again, on acres and crops out there that we're going to be able to add there. As far as the timeline, what we really are, because there is some tight timeframes here that we're looking at to make sure that we provide producers that opportunity to look at those base acres here. So June 1 or June 1st, I will put it that way, is where we should start to see, hopefully the plan is for notifications to start to go out to producers on what available base acres. And when I say producers, I need to make sure I'm a little bit more specific on that, Aaron. Landowners. So those base acres, again, they are tied to the land. And so it's going to be the landowners that get these notifications. And just for producers' references or for landowners' references, these letters are going to be more about if they want to opt out or not, because we're going to automatically assume that we're adding those acres. So it's going to be more of an approach is that are they going to opt out or are they okay with the acres there? The one area there that we will need clarifications is on that, what I would call the subsequent crop situation, Aaron. The subsequent crop, probably a little bit more of reference for our producers out there when I talk about subsequent crops is I can throw this out here is in the aspect that producer, well, this year might unfortunately be a year that some of our producers are faced out there, but let's say they lost their wheat crop there again. We're getting some pretty cold weather that's come through the area. We're getting some drought that's definitely hit a lot of part of our Kansas. If they lose their crop there, or if they have lost that wheat crop during that 19 through 23 time years, and they followed it up with, let's say, corn, milo, soybeans, whatever like that, those producers, those landers would have to decide whether or not they wanted to update those base acres with those wheat acres, or if they want to update those base acres with the sorghum or whatever that subsequent crop was there. They're going to have to make a choice because, again, that would have been in the same cropping year. They're going to need to make a choice which crop that they want to update those base acres on for that.
Okay, that's an important bit of information there. So I guess people just watch their mailboxes around that June period, and if you have out-of-state landlords, make sure they're aware of that, right?
Absolutely key on that. Exactly, Aaron. Watch your mailbox, like you said, and for those producers out there tenants who have absentee landowners, make sure that you got them aware of it. And then make sure that you're having that discussion with those landowners there. Again, questions. I always like to say, if you got questions, our county offices are out there for a purpose there, can help answer some of those questions if they do have questions here. One thing, Aaron, I want to make sure I note is that we're talking about adding base acres there. We're not talking about reallocation of what the existing base acres out there. Had a fun discussion with a producer here just the other day, and he mentioned, so I've got, 80 acres wheat, and I've got 5 acres of oats and 5 acres of barley, Can I finally get rid of, I haven't grown oats or barley, the scenario that we hear obviously a lot there. And I said, well, congratulations, you're still going to have 5 acres of oats and 5 acres of barley. Those current base acres are not going anywhere. This is about adding additional acres.
Well, and that's a nice segue. Hey, it was great to have oat acres for the Bridge Assistant Program. And so how's that rolling out?
The Farmer Bridge Assistance Program there, definitely the feedback, Aaron, that I have gotten from producers and employees. Again, just so producers, listeners are aware out there, the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program was not a program that was passed by Congress. This is a program that came up by President Trump and Secretary Rawlins through USDA funds to try to be able to get that assistance out there to producers. Obviously facing with low commodity prices there, there just has not been any trade that has occurred over the prior time to Trump there, and then high input costs. That's what that Farmer Bridge Assistance was designed for. And the great thing was the aspect that it was an easy program for both the producers and from our county offices on being able to sign up and being able to process it quickly, getting it out there to producers in a fast way. When we talk about a total program of $11 billion, available out there nationwide, Kansas, we sent out almost $770 million there. So obviously a significant portion of that Farmer Bridge Assistance went out there to help producers.
Great timing for that. There's also another assistance program, the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program, I believe Stage 2. And so from the losses in 2023 and 2024, we really got hit hard in 2023. So who's eligible for that and how do they apply?
So for the step up, so here just the other week, Secretary Rollins went out there and announced on Friday, she says, original and definitely producers probably noticed when they signed up for that Supplemental Disaster Relief Program or SDRP underneath stage 1, they probably remember seeing down there in the corner a 35% factor being put in on that total dollar amount that they had there. Well, that was what Secretary said, is that 35%. We're now changing that calculation up to 70%. And then, when we were implementing that program, we've continued to implement that stage 1 program there from our standpoint, helping producers to work through it. We've also implemented a stage 2 program, which is definitely much more focused in towards shallow losses and quality losses for some of our producers that happened out there. And so we're continuing to implement. Secretary also announced that deadline was extended through April 12th to give additional time there. Again, for that top-up payment on that program, there could be some nuances with various producers' operations, maybe some additional documentation or, such things as possibly proof of yield from crop insurance, stuff like that they may need. For the most part, Aaron, it should be pretty much automatic as our offices are working their way through the documentations, everything like that, to be able to get that out there to producers. Again, if our producers are wondering where it's at, what their status is of their application or what they need to do, talk to the county office, kind of work their way through that on that there. Again, you said it very eloquently, Aaron, when you said, Kansas really suffered in 23 and 24 being impacted by drought, that area. Had the opportunity to engage with several producers in Kansas. I said, congratulations, you were the unlucky winner of having terrible years in 23 and 24. Kansas was number 1 in the nation. We had over 60,000 applications for SDRP. It really hit our producers hard. They know it firsthand.
Yeah, it's not a ranking you want, but glad to have that assistance out there. Let's talk a little bit about technology. I think it's exciting. I know you're excited about it. The one farmer, one file concept, trying to consolidate and streamline things between your agency and NRCS and risk management agency. So give us an update on that.
Absolutely. Really exciting times. Aaron, your listeners out there know, we have cell phones today that have capabilities of chasing where tractors and combines are at, where irrigation systems are at. Incredible. We need, banking online, everything like that. One of the focus that has definitely been by the secretary, by the undersecretary, Richard Fordyce, and the administrator, Bill Beam, is to bring modernization, bring FSA, bring the agency USDA into the modern century and work with that. That's what's kind of exciting, kind of tying in, Aaron, to what we talked earlier, farmers.gov, login.gov. It's kind of the neat thing that we're talking about here, being able to open up those opportunities for producers to utilize online stuff there. We still get into that aspect of producers needing help, and that's what we want to make sure we're doing from FSA is talking, helping our producers out there. But I have opportunity to talk to a lot of producers here, Aaron, who were able to either had or had their offices work them through of getting the login.gov, getting the farmers.gov, getting signed up for it. And then, it was neat, Aaron. They come back to me and they're like, Farmer Bridge Assistance Program, that was so cool. 2 clicks and I was signed up. Now, with that being said, I want to make sure I'm clear. All technology can have hiccups at time, Aaron. I think even today when we were getting ready to start this podcast, we were having a little bit of technology hiccup there, but
a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. So, it's something that we're even working on at USDA, trying to make sure that we're doing it better, seamlessly. We're getting those hiccups ironed out there. That's one of the reasons why, by the administrator, I'm actually in DC here this week. And that's one of the things we're talking is about right now, Aaron, this week, is ways that we can take and do to help our officers better serve our producers out there. And one of the key areas that we're definitely focusing on and have heard a lot about, talked about, done a lot of brainstorming on is the use of technology. I can just tell you this, there's some definite definitely exciting things coming down when we're looking at producers here. I got to share. We had a producer, I had them come into the state office and kind of walk them through the process of signing up for farmers.gov. It was a great learning process, Aaron, right? I don't know about you. I can always like to learn a little bit more on technology, but we learned some tricks of things that we need to make sure we're doing from an FSA standpoint. We showed them some things on their point, and, they signed up for FBA through it, and they thought that was really cool. But what was really neat there is a couple of days later, they were working with their crop insurance agent and called me up. They were just so excited about it, and they were like, "You won't believe this. I was talking with my crop insurance agents, and he says, listen, I'm going to need your crop reporting, your 578s from FSA." Producer said, "Wait a minute, let me check something." So he jumps over to farmers.gov, opens up his records. There's his 578. He sent them right over to our crop insurance agent. And it was like he said, it saved me so much time from having to run back over to FSA, getting it printed off, getting that, going back to crop insurance. So again, that's just a small example of what we're seeing. And that's really what we're talking about, is ways that we can do a better job of serving our producers.
Wow, I just don't think you can overemphasize how great that is to make those streamlines and advancements through the website. So kudos on doing that. It'll be exciting to see how that evolves. That all does tie into kind of, the questions about USDA reorganization and staffing issues, and, having that farmer.gov offer some efficiencies. But as a state director, how do you feel about staffing right now in Kansas?
Obviously, I don't think it's anything that's news to anybody. The early retirement, designated retirement program that was offered here this last year, and a lot of USDA employees, including FSA employees, took advantage of that there. And so, again, these are people that were coming up, were very close to being eligible or eligible for retirement, took advantage of that and went ahead and retired. And we definitely saw, a loss of staff there. That's one of the things there that our producers know. Prime example, obviously, this year when we're dealing with lower crop prices, high input prices, we've got to manage a budget that a farmer does, is working with his operation, and got to make sure that it makes sense. And that's where we're at from an FSA, from a USDA standpoint. We have Congress gives us the budget, okay, and we've got to work within that budget and do the best that we can with that budget there. And absolutely, when it comes to staffing, we're here to keep our staff. We want to hire back in staff and replace those vacancies with where we see and where they need to be placed. Neat thing, just to help your listeners kind of understand there. We have tools available. I know underneath my first tenure here, it was kind of an introduction of a tool that, conglomerates a lot of information and shows basically what workloads are roughly in accounting. Again, a lot of nuances. Tool is an incredible tool, but it's something that can give us guidance and really show us those offices that really have a high workload and where we need to make sure we prioritize that placement of staff there. So definitely a great tool that we utilize there to make sure we get the people in the right place there. I've just got to absolutely brag, Aaron, about our state and about Kansas FSA. We have done such a good job that it has shown, even in a tight budget, our Kansas FSA people, that we do need to hire some people on. And we're in the process of hiring on people right now, both people in county offices. We also have a couple of programs. One's called our County Executive Director Trainee Program. So basically, we hire on people. They go through a training program about a year long for it to be a county director in one of the counties in Kansas. And we also have a FLOT program that we're going to be hiring on, and that's our Farm Loan Officer Trainee Program there. And again, we bring them on. That's actually about a 2-year process for those employees to get through, and then they have loan approval process, and they can process loans out there. They go out there in that county office there and work with producers and beginning farmers and helping them to provide opportunity to credit out there for that there. So staffing is something, and that's one of the reasons, Aaron, like I mentioned earlier, that we're back here right now, and that's what the Secretary is focused upon with reorganization, is to take our employees and make sure from an agency perspective and from an employee perspective, we have the right people in the right location doing the right job. And that's what the focus has been here. I would tell you this much. It's always great coming into DC, and obviously such a historical place, a neat place to be able to get to see here, be here at the USDA building. But I will tell you this much. The task force is a very small task force. Just 10 of us have come back in here to the national office to be a part of this task force to look at it there. It is long days. Our days are generally starting about 7:30 in the morning, and generally we get over about 6 p.m. in the evening. And we do get about 30 minutes for lunch, but we're here to work, and that's what we want to do to make sure that we're being efficient, getting the staffing there, and getting tools to our staff. Again, Aaron, we're wanting to hire our staff and get them in the right location. We've got to work within a budget that's provided by Congress. But what we can definitely do is look at all the tools that are available for us to make sure that our staff are efficient and can do the best job they can. Again, how many times do you hear it from a farmer perspective is that they're stewards of the land, and what their goal is to take care of that land and pass it down to the next generation. That's what my perspective is here, is that I'm a steward of the funds that's been given, and a responsibility of making sure that we're delivering programs, relief, help to our producers out there as best as we can.
Well, it's great that you're part of that task force. In a time, David, right now of low commodity prices, high inputs, is it for farmers to stay in touch with their FSA office to avoid anything bad happening?
Well, there's a lot of things. So we're looking at multiple things going on right now. Right now we're operating underneath a Farm Bill extension, an extension of the 2018 Farm Bill. So there are programs out there right now that have had extensions, openings, new programs are still coming up despite not having a new Farm Bill. One of them is that we just got done with a general and a continuous CRP. We just opened up a grassland CRP. So even though we don't have a new farm bill, those programs we've had authority given to us by the extension there. I think we've heard a lot of the congressional ag committees, both on the House side and Senate side, refer to the One Big Beautiful Bill as kind of the heavy lift when talking about farm bill programs. Again, we've talked about already ARC, PLC, we've talked about base acres and that stuff there. So it's something there that we're implementing changes right now based upon the One Big Beautiful Bill. And there's still changes coming, Aaron. So there's still some decisions being made by leadership on what getting rules written correctly for there. And then again, what's going to happen with a new farm bill, when it's going to get passed? It's supposed to go to the full House floor here, I think, in a few days here. We'll see what that happens. Obviously, it's still got to get through the Senate, kind of go through that whole process there. But a lot of changes are happening right now. So that's why the producer, stay in contact with the county office. We talked about technology. Go to farmers.gov. That is one website that, again, with the technology embracing, definitely we keep up to current. It has that information out there. But it's also, Aaron, what I even talked about being here in DC. We've got changes and programs and the way we're handling them rolling out there. And we're going to start to see an even greater utilization of farmers.gov. Again, when it comes to staffing, we're going to have staff out there in offices. We're going to staff those offices as much as the budget allows us there. But when producers goes to farmers.gov and they stay on top of it there, what it does is it gives the ability for our offices to definitely focus the time they need to help the producer that does come in. So come in when you need to. Go to farmers.gov when you need to.
Sounds like great advice to bookmark that site. Just make it part of the round of sites you check in on the web every day, or at least once a week. And it's great to have that resource. It's transformational, I'm sure. I'll go check it out. I'm not even a farmer, but I'll go check it out. Hey, David, best of luck for what you're doing there in D.C. It's great that you're on that task force, and I'm sure you're having great success there. Any closing words or thoughts before we wrap up?
I just want to leave your producers, your listeners out there, Aaron, with the aspect here is that it's absolutely, from my perspective, been a privilege to serve here underneath President Trump's second term and underneath Secretary Rollins here. We are moving fast. We're implementing changes. And the bottom line comes in is our focus is on producers and delivering programs to producers out there. That's what we're about, and that's what we're focused on. We're here to serve our producers, and producers with questions or whatever, always reach out to us, reach out to our offices, farmers.gov, even reach out to me. I'm just a farmer after all, and I understand a lot of the challenges that they're facing out there.
All right, David, appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again down the road.
All right.
That was David Schemm, State Executive Director with the USDA Farm Service Agency in Kansas. If you're enjoying this podcast, please tell your friends about it. They can find the podcast and previous episodes at wheatsonyourmind.com or Apple and Spotify. Thanks for listening.